Hi, I'm Claire and I recently drove around Ireland for a week in a Bunk Campers camper van. Unfortunately, my trip got off to a little bit of a shaky start.
I'm sort of running into a couple of roadblocks where the things that I wanted to do are not open.
And so I decided I was just going to go where the wind took me, where the fairies led me. And that actually led to some amazing adventures.
Okay, so like, no joke, that actually was one of the best nights of my life.
In Ireland we have brown signs on the side of the motorway that let us know where the heritage sites are, and all my adventures began by following a brown sign off the motorway for Donaghmore Famine Workhouse, where I met a character named Michael and his dog Lily.
We welcome all people, and we're dog friendly as well, because I have my own dog here, so I can't complain about anybody else's dog when I have my own dog in here. For the most part, people can just drive in off the road and come in and see us. If you behave yourself, we might make a cup of tea for you. I know this is alright.
That's alright?
I'm trying to stay off of it. Hello everybody, my name is Michael Cray. I'm from a place called Rathdowney, where we are at the moment, and I'm a tour guide here in Donaghmore Workhouse. It's a famine workhouse, commissioned in 1850 under the Poor Law Union and completed in 1853 at the cost of about £5,000. So this is part of the Agricultural Museum section of Donaghmore Workhouse. It's a famine workhouse and agricultural museum. There were kind of three strands to the story of Donaghmore. It was the workhouse, and then during the War of Independence it was a barracks for the British soldiers, and then in 1927 a dairy co-op started here, and there was a dairy co-op here from 1927 up to about 1996, and that's a butter churn from the dairy at the time for producing butter on a grand scale. Workhouses were built to accommodate the destitute people from the famine. The famine wasn't an accident. It was partly man-made, really, by the policies of the British government. The workhouses were funded by the landlord's taxes. They had to be seen to be doing something, you know, as regards the famine. The lesser of the two evils was to come in here, but unfortunately it wasn't a great choice. You could leave if you wished, but if you wished to leave, the whole family had to go. The whole system was a way of grinding down the population. The famine began in the winter of 1846 when the potato was attacked by a disease called blight, which incidentally blew in on the wind from America, which is quite ironic, seeing as we all ended up going back to America after the famine. But the famine didn't just affect Ireland, it also affected England. The poor people in England were starving as well, but the British government, in their wisdom, started shipping all the corn and the livestock from Ireland to England to feed the English population, so the Irish population were left with little or nothing. They had to give them something, so they imported poor quality corn from America, which was really only fit for feeding the livestock. So as a consequence of all that, the population began to starve, and the British government built these workhouses. This is an aerial view of Donaghmore Workhouse. So they're roughly all the same shape, all designed by an English architect called George Wilkinson. And there are about 150 of them in total in Ireland were. There are only a few of them left now, and this is one of the only few that are actually designated tourist sites. So that's a map of where all the different workhouses were built originally in the different counties. The landlords wanted to make the workhouses as uninviting as possible and make them a place of last resort. So the first thing they did, they came in here, and there was a building here which is now removed. It was an admissions building where the paupers came in here, and they were assessed by a Dr. John Farrenhart. So this is where the admissions building would have been. There would have been a building here which was removed by the co-op, because in latter years when the co-op was here they needed extra space to get in here. But at the time it would have been the room where the doctor assessed the different people going in. So this is an aerial view of the workhouse. Within the red line is the original footprint of the workhouse, and the buildings outside that are the buildings that were erected when the co-op started. Donaghmore Creamery started here in 1927. Which went on to become Avonmore, which went on to become Glanbia. So the famous Glanbia brand started here. There's quite a bit of history attached to this place. And this would have been where the admissions building was. That's just a drawing of where the building would have been, just in front of the dining hall in this area here. The hygiene and the conditions were very poor here because there was no proper toilet facilities, no sewage system. Many of them were at close quarters with each other, and they contracted disease from each other as well. So the doctor in here was a man called Dr. John Farrenhart. He sacrificed himself by coming in here to try and help the paupers, but unfortunately, as a consequence of doing all that, he himself contracted typhus and died in here. So he's a bit of an unsung hero to some extent, and he would have been part of the gentry class because an Irish person of the time or at the time couldn't have managed to become a doctor. So he sacrificed his life to do that. And this would have been part of his surgery. These are some of his instruments. And unfortunately, he was fighting a losing battle in here. There's evidence, not evidence, but there's a testimony that there would have been amputations and all sorts of gruesome things happening. Young girls were put into this block here. Women and children under 2 were put in this block here. Young boys were put in this block. The men were put in that block. This is the boys' schoolroom. Interestingly enough, there's no girls' schoolroom because at the time they didn't bother educating the girls, so there's no evidence of a girls' schoolroom. And this is the dining hall. We can take a look in the dining hall if you wish. So this is the dining hall. And as you can see, the windows here are normal height because this was the area where the staff were. And this is part of the original floor, the brickwork. They were never all in the dining hall at the same time. This is part of the dining hall area, and you will notice that when you come in here, the windows are higher. And the reason being was that when the paupers were in here dining, the different groups, they couldn't actually see out to see their parents. So this was part of the cruelty of the place. There's a wall missing. I'm in the process of doing this drawing, so it's not complete. I'm still working on my architectural skills. And this is the infirmary at the back. And the infirmary out here is not part of the tour because it's in bad repair. But to give you an idea of the size of the place, when they got sick, they were put into this building back here, which was the infirmary. And on the end of the infirmary, then there was a morgue. And the inevitable journey then was if and when they died, and many of them did die in here, they ended up here in the grave. There's a mass grave out the back here. There's just one headstone to indicate where the grave is. It's a mass grave. We believe they were buried without coffins. The building over here would have been the bakery. It's called the workhouse, so there were different jobs. There would have been had the women baking and doing the laundry mostly, and then the men would have been grinding corn for the bread, to make the bread, and breaking stone. They brought stone from the local quarry, and the stone was broken up and used to surface the roads. It was taken back out. So they're the jobs they would have had them doing here. I have a friend who sculpts with a chainsaw. His name is Joe Hyde. He's not a professional sculptor, but he is brilliant. There was an empty glass case here, and I asked him if he'd like to do something to put in it to represent the famine, and he came up with this horrific but brilliant sculpture of a man starving and crying out in despair to the sky, and he called it Forgotten. There's a little piece I'd like to recite for you. We might just sit down while I'm doing it. It's a description given by a British works manager who came to work in Ireland, was sent over by Queen Victoria to run a workhouse in County Cork. And this is a description of what he found when he arrived in Ireland. Although a man not easily moves, I confess myself unmanned by the extent and the intensity of the suffering I've witnessed in this place, more especially among the women and little children, crowds of whom could be seen scattered over the turnip fields like a flock of famishing crows, devouring the raw turnips. Mothers half naked, shivering in the sleet and snow, uttering exclamations of despair whilst their children were screaming with the hunger. I saw the dying, the living and the dead, lying indiscriminately on the same floor, with nothing between them and the cold earth, save a few miserable rags upon them. Dogs devoured the unburied corpses. There was no room in the workhouse for the half of them. Those who could not get in just went and lay down on the bank of the river below the bridge. They were to be seen there every morning after spending the night, stretched in rows, some stirring and some quiet enough and stirring no longer. Presently people came and lifted those who were still, and they put them onto carts, and they took them to a place called Clisare, where a big, wide, deep pit gaped open for them, and they threw them all into the pit together. I am a match for anything else I've met here, but this I cannot stand. So that's the description given of conditions in Ireland at the time. And I'd like to recite a poem for you now. I have 2 books of poetry published, and the first book is called The Rhymes of a Rustic Boy. And when I wrote my first pageant based on the famine in the workhouse, I wrote a poem called Wailing Walls, which tells the story of a woman and her child who came to the gates of the workhouse and they were refused admission because they were told the place was full, and they both starved to death out at the gate while the people in here looked on. Sadness seeps from every wall, horror howls in every hall. A child with only days to live, her mother, nothing left to give, brought her to this place in hope, no longer life and her to cope. In here is bad, yet outside worse, eating grass, too weak to curse the men who brought them down to this. The mother turns and tries to kiss some life into her starving child, as out the back the corpse is piled. The smell of death on every tree, no life, just weeping effigies, stare about and wonder why the God they loved has passed them by. As child and mother breathe their last, ghosts come howling from the past. No man should have to die this way. Thank God that I was here today to heed these wailing walls. Shinné. My inspiration for that poem, well, the story is of the woman and child who passed away, but the title Wailing Walls came to me from being here at times. When I was preparing to do some of the pageants I wrote, I was often here in the small hours preparing sets and scenery for the pageants. Now, I never actually saw any ghosts, but I was often kind of quite sure I could hear crying, almost the walls crying to me. I do believe that a building can retain bad memories and bad energy, and that's where I got that idea to call it Wailing Walls, because I could almost imagine the walls to be crying at times.
And if people wanted to get your poetry books, how do they get them?
Go on to a website called Rustic Boy, RUSTIC Boy, BOY.com. That's my own website, and I sell the books there. They're not all about the famine. There are some light-hearted ones, some funny ones, and my own comical take on Irish life and Irish characters. One woman said, I enjoy your poetry books because I keep them in the toilet. I've written and produced 3 pageants based on the famine. It's fallen down, it's like the workhouse is fallen. I could set the house on fire. So the English setting fire to the house. So that was the house, had an eviction scene. That's part of the original floor. And this is part of the original staircase, believe it or not. So the workmanship was brilliant in the workhouses. It would be a fallacy to say that they were built by the paupers, a bit like they say that the pyramids were built by slaves. They weren't really, they were built by skilled craftspeople. And this is part of the original staircase from 1850, believe it or not. I hold my hands up and say, I'm not sure what timber it is, but I'll find out. On the floor here we have just a little mannequin to depict how they would have slept. So this is the boys' dormitory. They slept on the floor on sacking filled with straw. So there might have been up to 100 boys in here, so you can just imagine what that was like. And that's a little poem which was written by a Kilkenny man called Tom Shelley, who's since passed on. I just found his book in a second-hand bookshop. He was from a place called Castlecomer in County Kilkenny, and that's just a short poem that was in his book, and I thought it was appropriate. It's called Hunger. Upon the earth abundance lies, and there is corn to reap, and hunger should be kept at bay, and children should not weep, and love should make its presence known to comfort and console, for when a child in hunger cries, an angel weeps alone. And that's the detention room in there. So many of the poor, unfortunate paupers were psychiatrically unwell. And could you blame them, especially when their children were taken away from them on entry, which in itself was enough to drive them over the edge. And so many of the paupers in here would have been had to be controlled as far as the English were concerned. So this was the detention room. So people who were out of control were often locked in there to control them. So that's, yeah, it's just more of the same, really. I'm going to sing a song for you now to warm myself up. It's a Christy Moore song. Well, I'm not sure who wrote it, but Christy Moore sings it. I don't think he wrote it. It's called Irish Ways and Irish Laws. And I close my eyes when I'm singing, actually. It's just a habit I have, so I'm not going to sleep. Once upon a time there was Irish ways and Irish laws, villages of Irish blood, waking to the morning, waking to the morning. Cromwell and his soldiers came, started centuries of shame, but they could not make us turn. We're a river flowing, we're a river flowing. Again, again the soldiers came, burnt our houses, stole our grain, shot the farmers in their fields, working for a living, working for a living. 800 years we have been down, the secret of the water sound has kept the spirit of a man above the pain descending, above the pain descending. This is part of the boys' sleeping quarters again, and just before we go into this next room, which is the master's quarters, take note of the differences, slight, subtle differences between the boys' quarters and the master's quarters. Most importantly, he and she, his wife, would have had a fireplace. So there's no evidence of any heating system here for the children, the paupers, but the staff and the master would have had a fire. So you'll see what I mean here now. The windows are splayed out slightly, which allows more light in, and you will notice there's more light in this room, and the air is almost lighter. The ceiling is insulated, and the walls were finished off, and of course he had a fireplace. And people have compared these places to the concentration camps in Germany and other places. Similar to what they did in many of the concentration camps, the Germans, they would have had used the Jews themselves as the staff. And here some of the staff, again, would have been the paupers themselves who were given a bit of status. And this is the master's bedroom over here. The beds are only just for effect. They're obviously not the beds from the time, because in between years, all these rooms would have been used by the CoOp. This might have been an office. The beds are just for effect. But he would have had a fireplace. And that's an outside view of the dining hall again. You can see the height of the windows, which meant that the people out in the courtyard here couldn't see in, nor could the people inside see out. So the third strand of the story here, the final part, is the story of the British Army being here during the War of Independence. And there's a room in here now where I'm going to show you where they wrote their names on the walls. So during the famine, this would have been a records room where they kept the records. And unfortunately, the records, many of the records are gone and lost because they were taken to Dublin for supposedly safekeeping when the workhouse closed and they got burnt in the fires of the War of Independence. A lot of the records were destroyed. So we don't have evidence of the actual register of the people who passed through the place. But then when the British Army were here from about 1920 to about 1922, this was an ammunitions room. You can see here, and it's amazing how it has survived, the names of many of the soldiers. They wrote their names up here, some of the names. And the KSLI is the King's Shropshire Light Infantry. We even have evidence of the planes from the First World War drawn on the walls. This is genuine. This is drawings from the time, and it's a miracle that all this has survived all through the years of the CoOp years. That it's amazing that nobody came along and whitewashed over the whole thing, because it's actually only written in pencil. But it's amazing evidence to have of the people actually being here and their own handwriting, and this would have been an insignia of the Gordons Battalion. So we're open 5 days a week at the moment, Monday to Friday, open 9 to 5. And in the summertime we'll be open 2 to 5 on Saturdays and 2 to 5 on Sundays. And we're Donaghmore Workhouse. We're in the southwest corner of County Laois, and the postcode is R32 PC58. We welcome all people, and we're dog friendly as well, because I have my own dog here, so I can't complain about anybody else's dog when I have my own dog in here. And there is a website. There's no pre-booking on the website, unfortunately, but there is a phone number there. It's not my phone number, it's a phone number. If a bigger group were coming, say a school group or a big tour bus, they would need to ring that number just to give a bit of warning. But for the most part, people can just drive in off the road and come in and see us. If you behave yourself, we might make a cup of tea for you. We've no biscuits, because I'm trying to stay off the biscuits. I won't. So my name is Michael Cray, and if you want to buy my books, I'm on rusticboy.com.
If you're going to the Donaghmore Famine Workhouse and Agricultural Museum, please take Michael's tour. He is a storyteller. He really made the whole place come alive. Check out the website for directions and booking information in the description of this video, and also check out Michael's poetry in the link down below. A big thank you to Bunk Campers for the camper van of my dreams in which I travelled to all of my adventures. Thank you so much to my patrons who make trips like this happen with their support. If you are in a position to, please consider becoming a patron. Thank you so much, Michael, for an amazing day, and thank you also for the suggestion for my next adventure.
Thanks, Claire, for visiting.
Thank you, Michael. I've had a great time.
And I have to tell Claire now about where she can find all the different music sessions.
Definitely. We're headed now to Tipperary. It's a long way away.
I'm going, the streams of whiskey are flowing.
Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to show you the next one. Slán slán.